A quiet rancher noticed something strange one morning when the sun had barely risen over his land. He saw his maid walking across the yard, moving slower than usual, her steps uneven and painful. She was limping badly, yet she forced a small smile as if nothing was wrong. The rancher had known her for years, and that smile felt wrong. Almost broken, he did not ask questions, and he did not show anger. But his eyes followed every step she took. He noticed the way she avoided looking at him, the way her hands trembled, and the fear hiding behind her silence. Something dark had happened, and he could feel it in the heavy air around them. The rancher was not a man of loud words or quick reactions. He believed silence could speak louder than shouting. That morning, he made a quiet decision that no one saw coming. Without warning, without drama, he began a path that would uncover a buried truth, challenge powerful people, and send shockwaves straight into the sheriff's office. The rancher was known across the valley as a calm and soft-spoken man who stayed away from trouble. He did not argue, he did not threaten, and he never tried to prove his strength with loud words. People often mistook his silence for weakness, but those who truly knew him understood it was controlled. He treated every worker with respect, paid them fairly, and listened more than he spoke. He believed dignity mattered more than power. That morning felt different the moment he stepped outside. The air was quiet, but his instincts felt restless. He noticed small details others would ignore, like uneasy movements and forced routines. When he saw his maid earlier, something stayed with him, a feeling he could not shake. He did not panic, and he did not rush to conclusions. His face showed no emotion, yet inside his mind was alert and focused. His silence was not empty. It was filled with concern, awareness, and a slow-building resolve that something was deeply wrong and could no longer be ignored. As she moved past him, again the limp became impossible to ignore, and this time he watched more closely, noticing how her weight shifted with each step and how pain tightened her jaw even when she tried to hide it. Her hands shook as she adjusted her sleeves, and for a brief second bruises showed before she pulled the fabric down quickly, as if ashamed of being seen. That he spoke softly, asking if she was hurt, keeping his voice calm so she would not feel cornered. She froze for a moment, then forced a laugh and said she was fine, blaming it on tired legs and long hours. But her eyes betrayed her words. They were filled with fear, not discomfort, and they searched the ground instead of meeting his gaze. The rancher felt a quiet tension settle in his chest. He had seen fear before, not the kind that fades with rest, but the kind that comes from being threatened. He did not press her further because he understood that fear closes mouths instead of opening them. He stepped aside and let her pass, yet his mind stayed with her every movement, every careful step, every flinch at sudden sounds. As the day continued, he noticed more signs she was trying to hide. She avoided certain paths on the ranch, startled easily when voices grew louder, and kept her distance from the road leading into town. The rancher worked as usual, feeding animals and checking fences, but his thoughts stayed sharp and focused. He began connecting small details that no one else would notice, patterns that pointed towards something deliberate and cruel. He remembered how trust is broken quietly, and how victims often learn silence as survival. As evening approached, he saw her struggle again while carrying supplies, and this time he stepped in without making it obvious, lifting the weight so she would not strain herself. She thanked him quickly, her voice low, her eyes still guarded. That look stayed with him long after she left his sight. That he realized then that ignoring this would mean becoming part of the harm, something he refused to. He was not a man of rage, but he was a man of responsibility. He knew that truth needed patience, not noise, and justice required proof, not assumptions. That night he stayed awake longer than usual, listening to the land settle into darkness. Planning each step carefully, he thought about who had power in the town, who believed they could act without consequences, and how fear had kept others silent for too long. The rancher understood that change would not come through confrontation but through exposure. He decided to watch, to listen, and to document quietly, ensuring that when the truth surfaced it would be undeniable. By the time dawn approached, his path was clear in his mind, and though his face remained calm, his resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. Because one limp had revealed a pain that would no longer be ignored. As dusk settled and shadows stretched across the ranch, he noticed her leaving quietly, choosing a narrow path that led away from the main road. And, without drawing attention, he followed at a distance, careful not to alarm her. She stopped near an old shed where the noise of the town faded, and when she sensed someone behind her, she turned sharply, fear flashing across her face before recognition softened it. He did not speak at first, giving her space, letting silence do the work he trusted. When he finally spoke, his words were gentle, steady, and free of judgment. And something in his tone made her shoulders drop as if a heavy weight had finally been set down. She tried to dismiss him again, but her voice cracked, and the truth began to spill in broken pieces. She spoke of threats whispered in dark corners, of warnings delivered with smiles that carried danger, and of a man whose influence reached into places where complaints disappeared. She described how resistance had been met with force, how pain was meant to teach obedience, and how fear had been used like a leash to keep her quiet. She believed no one would listen because others had already looked away, choosing comfort over courage. The rancher listened without interrupting, his face calm though his chest burned with controlled anger. He asked careful questions, not pushing, allowing her to guide the pace, and each answer revealed a deeper wound that went beyond bruises. She admitted she had considered leaving town, but threats followed that thought too, reminding her that silence was the only thing keeping her safe, or so she had been made to believe. Her hands shook as she spoke, yet there was relief in finally being heard. In realizing that someone was standing there without fear of consequences, the rancher promised nothing dramatic and offered no false hope, only honesty, telling her she was not alone anymore, and that fear would no longer decide the truth. He explained that power loses its grip when light is applied carefully, and that he would move slowly, lawfully, and with purpose. She looked at him with disbelief at first, then with cautious trust, because his calm carried strength rather than noise. As they parted, he watched her walk away, still limping. But something had shifted in her posture, a hint of dignity returning where despair had lived. He returned to his home with a mind sharpened by clarity. Knowing the weight of what he now carried, he began outlining each step he would take, who he would speak to, and how evidence would be gathered without exposing her to more harm. He understood that the person responsible relied on silence and reputation, and that unraveling that protection required precision. He did not sleep much that night, not from fear, but from focus, because once truth is known, it demands action, and he had chosen to act in a way that would protect her and ensure that when the truth reached the right ears, it would be impossible to ignore. The next morning, he moved through the ranch with the same calm presence. Yet his actions carried purpose as sharp as a blade kept hidden. He began by noting times, places, and small changes that others ignored, writing details that formed a quiet map of truth. He checked paths near the shed, marked footprints softened by dust, and photographed bruises only after she agreed. Ensuring her safety came first, he spoke to workers individually, never accusing, never leading, only listening as stories surfaced about raised voices, threats disguised as favors, and warnings passed along like rumors meant to silence. That he visited the town during off hours, observing patterns, watching who avoided certain streets, and noticing how doors closed when a particular name was mentioned. He gathered records that showed favors granted and complaints stalled, linking dates with movements until the gaps began to speak. He requested copies of public logs without urgency, presenting himself as a man handling routine business, while his questions remained precise. He met a shopkeeper who hesitated before admitting to seeing her stumble weeks earlier after a late visit that ended too quickly. He spoke with a clerk who recalled forms submitted and never answered, and with a driver who had been paid to forget a night he remembered too. While he protected her identity by separating accounts, verifying timelines, and cross-checking facts so no single voice could be dismissed, he practiced patience, knowing haste would alert the wrong people, and restraint would keep the truth intact. At home, he organized everything with care, labeling evidence clearly, backing copies securely, and rehearsing how each piece would stand on its own. That he refused to share his plan, not from secrecy alone, but from respect for the weight it carried. He ensured she had support, arranging safe routes, adjusting schedules, and placing distance between her and danger without drawing notice. His demeanor never changed in public, and that was the most disarming part, Because those who watched him saw nothing to fear, he understood that power often underestimates quiet resolve, mistaking calm for compliance, and that mistake would cost them. When pressure brushed close, he stepped aside rather than push back, letting attention drift away while his work continued beneath the surface. He chose witnesses who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, strengthening credibility through care. That he waited until the case could breathe on its own, until proof formed a chain that could not be broken by influence. As days passed, the town carried on unaware, and the man responsible grew comfortable, unaware that comfort was built on borrowed time. The rancher reviewed each detail once more, checking for weakness, strengthening connections, and ensuring her story would be heard without distortion. When he finally closed his folder, he did not feel triumph, only readiness. Because justice was not a performance to him, but a duty. He knew the moment would come when silence would end, and when it did, the truth would arrive fully formed, steady, and impossible to ignore. He entered the sheriff's office without announcement, carrying a plain folder that held weeks of careful work, and the bell above the door barely rang before attention shifted toward him. That he greeted no one with urgency, waited until invited to speak, and then placed the folder on the desk with steady hands. As pages turned, the room grew still, chairs stopped creaking, and murmurs faded into silence because the evidence spoke clearly without emotion. There were timelines aligned with records, statements signed without pressure, images dated and verified, and notes that connected actions to consequences. The sheriff's expression changed slowly, curiosity tightening into concern, then settling into resolve as the scope became impossible to dismiss. Questions followed, precise and controlled, and the rancher answered each one with calm clarity, never exaggerating, never assuming, allowing facts to lead. He explained how influence had stalled complaints, how fear redirected witnesses, and how patterns revealed intent rather than accident. An officer stepped out to make calls. Another began copying documents, and the office shifted from routine to response. As more details surfaced, the weight of the matter became undeniable, transforming what appeared to be a minor injury into a coordinated abuse of power that demanded action. The sheriff requested additional verification, and the rancher provided it without hesitation, prepared for scrutiny because truth withstands pressure. He insisted on protections before names were shared, prioritizing safety over speed, and that insistence earned respect. The room filled with purposeful movement as procedures activated, warrants discussed, and protocols followed with care. An investigator listened quietly, then nodded, recognizing the structure of a case built to endure influence rather than crumble beneath it. The sheriff thanked him, not with praise, but with commitment, promising accountability guided by LAWAS. He stood to leave. The rancher felt neither relief nor satisfaction, only the gravity of responsibility easing into shared hands. He stepped back into daylight, aware that the town would soon feel the shift, not through spectacle, but through consequence. Behind him, doors closed with intention, phones rang with urgency, and a process began that would not be stopped by status or reputation. That he returned to the ranch with measured steps, knowing patience had carried the truth this far and would see it through. As evening approached, he checked on her quietly, offering reassurance without promises. Because the wheels were turning now under official watch, he understood that justice moves carefully when it is real, and that careful movement protects the vulnerable. The night settled with a sense of inevitability, as if the land itself recognized change approaching. And the quiet man who had walked into an office with proof had ensured that silence would no longer protect wrongdoing. Sirens were not needed for the town to feel the shift, because news traveled faster than sound, and by morning doors opened cautiously as officers moved with purpose. Arrests happened quietly, yet each one sent a ripple through familiar streets. Unsettling routines built on denial. Secrets surfaced through records and testimony, revealing how influence had shielded harm and how silence had been mistaken for consent. The maid was brought in with care, escorted without spectacle, and when she spoke, her voice did not shake. She told her story clearly, choosing words that belonged to her at last, describing moments she had buried and decisions forced upon her. Her steadiness surprised those who expected tears because courage had replaced fear. The room listened, not out of curiosity but respect, and statements were taken with precision as truth settled into the record. Witnesses who had once avoided eye contact came forward. Encouraged by the fact that someone had acted first, accounts aligned, timelines matched, and defenses weakened under consistent facts, the town began to understand that wrongdoing had thrived because it had been allowed to hide behind familiarity. Shops fell quiet as conversations changed tone, and names once spoken with confidence were now avoided. Children asked questions adults could not answer easily, and families reconsidered what they had ignored. The rancher remained distant from attention, continuing his work as usual, yet people noticed him differently now. They saw that strength had not arrived with shouting or threats, but with patience and care. The sheriff addressed the community with measured words, explaining that accountability would proceed without favoritism and that protection mattered more than reputation. That statement settled nerves and raised expectations, because fairness had finally found footing. The maid returned to the ranch under safer conditions, moving without haste, carrying herself with renewed dignity. She worked knowing she was seen and believed, and that knowledge changed everything. The land felt quieter, not from fear but from relief, as if tension had been released from the soil itself. Conversations at the market softened, apologies were offered without prompting, and boundaries were respected where they had once been crossed. The rancher checked on her briefly, offering support without intrusion. Understanding that healing requires space, he accepted no praise, deflected thanks, and refused to be named as anything other than a neighbor who did what was necessary. As proceedings continued, the town adjusted to a new truth that justice does not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it arrives through careful steps, steady hands, and a refusal to look away. That realization lingered long after the headlines faded, reshaping how people treated one another and how power was questioned. When evening lights came on across the valley, there was a shared sense that something essential had been restored, not perfection but balance, and the quiet path that led there became a lesson the town would not forget. He returned to his land without speeches or recognition. Letting the noise of town fade behind him as the fields welcomed his silence, he rose with the sun, worked with steady hands, and carried the quiet knowledge that he had chosen what was right when it mattered most. The maid moved freely now, her steps stronger, her voice confident, and her fear no longer deciding her future. The town slowly healed, learning that courage does not demand attention and justice does not require anger. What remained was a lesson written not in headlines, but in changed lives. The rancher never spoke about what he had done, because true strength needs no witness. His single choice had broken a chain of fear and restored dignity where it was taken. When people passed his land, they felt something different, a sense of safety built on integrity and resolve. One quiet act of courage had changed a life forever and reminded everyone that real power is not the ability to harm, but the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves.